right, so hat of the day, Minnesota Wild. Kirill Kaprizov, game-winning overtime goal. How exciting is that last night? All right, so today we're talking about a very early version of a draft big board for the Minnesota Vikings, who currently own the 14th overall pick in the first round. No second round pick is going to complicate a lot of things, so it is up to Rick Spielman as quickly as humanly possible to figure out a way to get back into the second round, because there's a lot of good talent in the top 100 this year, and a lot of these players aren't going to be able to be had in the third round. So had to dig a little deeper at some of these positions to figure out who we could realistically acquire given the draft capital that we currently have. Remember, this is a very early big board. We could always add different names to this if we get some more draft capital, or if we move up and down depending on what happens between now and April. So this is just, now I know that you're going to be like, well, there's a lot of names you left off here. There's no Zach Wilson, there's no Justin Fields. I created this list with a couple of things in mind. Number one, we don't have a top 10 draft pick. So players that are going in the top 10, I'm deeming as unrealistic expectations. We're not going to be able to get Zach Wilson or Justin Fields. Something would have to happen between now and April, or something would have to happen on the day of the draft itself for us to be able to get into a position for one of those players. So for right now, we're going to pretend that those are not a possibility. I'm also leaving off, a lot of other players, like, for example, at the tackle position, you don't see Christian Darrisaw. At the running back position, you don't see like a couple of the names that are going in the second round, like Najee Harris, Najee Harris will probably go in the first round, but like the North Carolina Tar Heels running backs, for example. We don't have a second round pick, and I don't think running back is a high priority right now, which is why I've listed a couple of players that I think we'll be able to get late day 2 or early day 3. So just a couple of things to think about. This isn't my rankings, if you will. These are just realistic targets that I think that the Vikings could potentially go after or be interested in, and I will give you why I think these players are who they are. So starting with the quarterback position, we of course have Trey Lance, Sam Ehlinger from Texas, and Kellen Mond from Texas A&M. Trey Lance is the most intriguing first-round quarterback, not named Trevor Lawrence or Zach Wilson in my mind. If we were to be able to get a quarterback, I think Trey Lance in the first round is the only one worth taking. At our position at 14 overall, if he were to fall that far. Maybe we have to trade up 2 spots to 12, but just his skill set, his athletic ability, the fact that he could sit for an entire year behind Kirk Cousins, we would not have to throw him to the wolves at all, is totally intriguing, because the question about him is whether or not he has enough experience, having only played 17 games at the FCS level. So I think Trey Lance would be a phenomenal quarterback for us to get if he was to fall to 14 overall. Also on the list, Sam Ehlinger and Kellen Mond. I just tried to think of 2, day 3 quarterbacks that would be intriguing prospects that could also sit for a while behind Kirk Cousins potentially, because I think anything right now would be just more intriguing than Sean Mannion at the quarterback 2 position. Remember in my video a few days ago where we talked about the top 5 priorities the Vikings face this offseason, and upgrading the backup quarterback situation is definitely one of them. And I think Sam Ehlinger or Kellen Mond, given the offenses that they were in, would be intriguing prospects as opposed to reaching for maybe a Mac Jones or a Kyle Trask. And there's really no other quarterback right now at this point in the process that I'm interested in. Next, we have the running backs. Didn't focus too much on here, just a couple of names that are intriguing. Kenneth Gainwell from Memphis, Trey Sermon from Ohio State, Kylan Hill from Mississippi State. Obviously, you don't really want a running back out of an air raid offense that was in Mississippi State this year, but I still think he's a good prospect. And if we find ourselves in a position where we can get one of these guys at great value, might not be a bad idea. The wide receiver position, one of these things is not like the other. We have Rashad Bateman, who I believe would be an interesting prospect if we were to play, this wild, what if game, like what if Adam Thielen gets cut to save money. He would be an immediately really good replacement, given that he is a really good possession receiver. The other receivers, you'll notice a pattern here. I went with smaller, faster, better in space guys like Rondale Moore from Purdue, Elijah Moore from Ole Miss, and Tylan Wallace from Oklahoma State. Smaller, shorter guys that are faster, that can stretch the field and make great things happen in space. More guys that you might want to use on gadget plays or jet sweeps or wide receiver screens, something to that effect. For the tight end position, I put down one. I went with Jeremy Ruckert from Ohio State, just, sort of recency bias from the national championship game. The tackle position, we got a lot of names here. Rashawn Slater from Northwestern is somebody who I think projects probably as a guard, given a lot of scouts talk about his arm length. He probably would work better at guard in his first year and then maybe later switch to tackle. For the rest of the position, you have a couple other first-round potential guys like Sam Cosmi from Texas, Jalen Mayfield from Michigan, some guys you could potentially get later, James Hudson from Cincinnati, and Alaric Jackson is an interesting name from Iowa because a year ago, along with Tristan Wirfs, there was talk about him potentially being a first or second-round pick. Not so much anymore. He didn't have the same kind of season this year at Iowa that he did last year. So you might be able to get a really good sneaky tackle at a premium this year if you go for Alaric Jackson in the later rounds. So that's going to do it pretty much for the offense. I'm going to switch over to the defense, so I'll be right back. All right, so now I have switched the board over to defense, but before I get into defense, I did realize I did forget to talk about the interior offensive line. So real quick, for the big board interior offensive lineman, we're going to be talking about Creed Humphrey a lot going forward, center from Oklahoma. I don't think we're going to play him at center if we do draft him. I think he could definitely switch out to guard, take over for Dakota Dozier. Garrett Bradbury, we still have to figure him out, so we'll give him another year, but I think Creed Humphrey is one of the better interior offensive line, at least in my opinion, coming out for this draft. Next, you would have somebody like Wyatt Davis from Ohio State. Didn't have a great year, but still one of the top offensive linemen on the interior. Elijah Vera Tucker from USC, who's been frequently mocked to us over the past couple of months. And then later in the draft, you could get somebody like Trey Smith from Tennessee or Deontay Brown from Alabama. Deontay Brown is, of course, a full-grown man. That dude is massive. For the defense on the board now, we have the interior defensive lineman, which is where we're going to start. Christian Barmore is at the top of the list for me. He made himself a lot of money at that national championship game in the second half, so he's definitely going to have a stock up situation going forward, and we'll see how far that stock can rise. Davian Nixon from Iowa is another player that I don't really know what the hype is about him. I'll have to look into it myself, but he is on the rise up draft boards, and a lot of people seem to be liking to mock him in the first round, at least as of recently. Also on the interior defensive line list, you have Alan McNeil from NC State, who doesn't love a nose tackle that can pass rush, and then somebody like, why not Tyler Shelvin from LSU, who is somebody that went under the radar this year. Next, you have the edge rushers. This is a very good group, and we definitely need somebody opposite of Daniil Hunter that is not Odenigbo or Jalen Holmes or DJ Wanham. DJ Wanham, I think, is a nice, intriguing prospect that's going to take a while to develop, but we need somebody impactful right now if we're being serious about contending for a Super Bowl. And those three guys aren't it. They shouldn't be starting week one opposite of Daniil Hunter. So these are the replacements that I'm thinking of for the 2021 NFL draft, starting with the top couple here. Most of these guys are going to go in the first round, so we should have the pick of the litter if the draft board falls our way. Really like Kwity Paye out of Michigan. I don't know if he's going to escape outside the top 10. It's possible that he does. But I think if Kwity Paye is on the board at our pick at 14, we definitely strike him. Absolute freak athlete at the position. Next, you have Greg Rousseau from Miami, who didn't play this year. He opted out, but a lot of draft nicks seem to think that he is a nice fit for what the Vikings do, given his athletic traits and his physical traits. So he could be a player whose name is definitely called at 14 overall. Other first-round potential edge rushers include Azeez Ojulari from Georgia. You have Jason Owe from Penn State, Jalen Phillips from Miami, Joseph Asai from Texas. Later on in the draft, you could probably get somebody like Rashard Weaver from Pitt. Moving on to the linebacker position, I don't think this is going to be a very big focal point for the Vikings going forward. We just happen to see the worst case scenario at this position this year with the injuries, which is why we had to start like Todd Davis and Troy Dye. But I think Troy Dye played well enough that he'll be a backup next season, and it's all going to depend whether or not we bring back Eric Wilson or maybe we get rid of Anthony Barr, because I know a lot of people want to get rid of his contract. So at the linebacker position, we could be looking at Zaven Collins in the first round out of Tulsa. Later on, you could get somebody like Jabril Cox, or you get somebody like Baron Browning, who is a very intriguing prospect from Ohio State, was recruited very heavily as I think a 4-star player, and kind of flew under the radar this year, but somebody who could be an interesting prospect at the linebacker position. So if he's available at a nice value, that could be a name you could get here. That could get called. Moving on to the corner position, which is interesting for the Vikings because I don't know if Mike Hughes is going to be brought back given his injury history in his very short amount of time in this league. They might just be done with him. Neck injuries are scary. We don't even know. Maybe Mike Hughes decides I've had enough. I'm done. The injuries are too much. So when all is said and done, I think Mike Hughes will be gone, needing to fill another void at the corner position. Dream scenario is, of course, Patrick Surtain. He's not falling out of the top 10. That's unlikely. Caleb Farley could fall out of the top 10, and I think if that situation were to occur, Rick Spielman would be on the phone with a gun to his head because Mike Zimmer would be pounding the table for one of these two guys. Outside of the dream scenarios, you could be looking at somebody like Sante Samuel Jr. from Florida State, Tyson Campbell from Georgia, a guy I really like. Greg Newsome from Northwestern, Eric Stokes from Georgia. Eric Stokes is a guy I've done a player profile on already. If you want to see the players that I've done profiles on, of course, don't forget to go to the channel and check out the 2021 NFL Draft playlist. All kinds of good stuff related to this for other teams and players on that playlist. Little self-plug, I guess. Wrap things up with the safety position. Anthony Harris is definitely on his way out. Harrison Smith, I think, should restructure and stay. So we'd be looking at a new safety, I believe at the free safety position. So you could get a guy like Trayvon Moehrig, who is the best safety in the class. That would cost you a first-round pick or at least an early second. Other guys would be Andre Cisco from Syracuse, Paris Ford from Pitt, or Richie Grant from UCF. Now, of course, I've left out some, but like a Darius Washington, I think is just too small at 5'8" to take seriously as a safety, especially in the Vikings defensive scheme. So I've kind of eliminated that one. And there's a few other ones, but these are the guys that I was most intrigued with. So that's it for the defensive side of the ball. Let me know what you thought about either side, offense and defense. Who are some names maybe that I didn't mention that you would add to your big board at the top, or maybe if there's just some disagreement overall. So let me know in the comments what you think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.